May 25, 1941, in the North Atlantic, about 500 miles south of Cape Farewell in Greenland, a young Navy officer's hand shook as he held the periscope, not because he feared the enemy above, but because of the strange sound he had just heard. Inside the steel walls of the U-557, a sharp metal ping echoed through the submarine, making every man freeze. Fritz zur See Herbert Wehrer later wrote in his diary, many years after the war, that the sound was like nothing they had ever practiced for. It rang through the boat like a church bell calling them to their own funeral. They now knew the British had found them under the sea for 3 years. German U-boat teams had moved almost freely, thinking the deep ocean would always hide them. They were taught that going underwater meant safety, and that the dark sea would cover them like night hiding a ship. But that spring morning in 1941, 22-year-old Wehrer and 48 other men on U-557 learned a terrible truth: the sea could no longer hide them. The Allies now had machines that could see through water. None of the men knew that this one ping started a new age of technology that would forever change submarine battles over the next 4 years. German U-boat crews would suffer slowly in mind and spirit as Allied sonar and tracking machines grew better, from rough tests into sharp tools of hunting. The new rules of fighting underwater were now made not by torpedo math, but by sound waves that showed where the U-boats hid, leading them to be destroyed faster than ever before the fall of German sea power had begun. But the story had really started 23 years earlier, near the end of World War I, when British and French scientists, desperate to stop the Kaiser's submarines that almost starved Britain, began trying to hear sounds under the water. The Royal Navy's anti-submarine group built the first sonar tools in 1918, yet the war ended before they could use them. Much only 3 submarines were ever caught that way in that whole war. But during the 1920s and 1930s, British experts at His Majesty's ship Osprey worked hard to make these early ideas better. The system they made, called ASDIC, worked by sending a high-pitched sound pulse through the water. When the sound hit a solid object, it bounced back as an echo. By timing how long the echo took, operators could figure out how far away the target was turning. The transmitter showed which direction it was in the first ASDIC sets. Went to sea in 1928 on British destroyers. These first machines were very simple. The oscillator, a quartz crystal disc that changed electricity into sound, had to hang over the side of the ship. The range was only about 3,500 yards in the best conditions. The system could not tell depth, only distance and direction. Operators wearing headphones had to tell real submarine echoes from noises made by whales, fish schools, wakes of other ships, and layers of different water. Temperatures. By 1939, the Royal Navy trusted ASDIC completely, so much that senior admirals thought submarines were no longer a big threat. Every Royal Navy destroyer had the equipment training schools, taught hundreds of operators and war plans. Assumed convoys with ASDIC escorts would lose very few ships, but this hope ended badly on September 3, 1939, just hours after Britain declared war on Germany. The passenger ship Athenia was torpedoed by U-30 west of Ireland, killing 117 people. The Battle of the Atlantic had started, and German U-boat commanders quickly learned the British anti-submarine defenses were not as strong as everyone thought. Captain Lothar Otto Kretschmer, Guy Prien, and Joachim Schepke led their submarines on deadly missions, sinking ship after ship with very few losses. Admiral Karl Donitz, who commanded the U-boat fleet, watched happily as his submarines had what became called the first happy time. German submariners believed strongly in their invisibility. Training taught that a submerged U-boat could not be found. The sea would absorb sound and hide their movement. Hydrophones could hear propellers from surfaced submarines, but a boat moving underwater on quiet electric motors was a ghost. This belief was strong at every level. Feldwebel Wolfgang Hirschfeld, the senior radio operator on U-109, wrote in his secret diary, "During patrols, we wrote in real time, we believed the enemy used the same listening machines from the last war. We were told there. Hydrophones could only hear loud engine noise, and as long as we stayed quiet after diving, we thought we were safe. But this idea was about to be destroyed." The first German U-boat crew to meet active sonar felt not just surprise, but real fear when an ASDIC pulse hit a submerged hull. It made a strange sound inside the boat. Survivors said it sounded like dropping dried peas into a tin can. A quick series of metallic clicks that got louder as the hunting ship got closer, unlike the steady hum of ship propellers through hydrophones. The sonar ping was clearly artificial, directional, and very scary. Lieutenant Herbert Werner was the watch officer on U-557 during his first war patrol in May 1941, and he faced sonar for the first time while chasing a convoy south of Greenland. His book Iron Coffins, written many years later, tells the story the destroyer's ASDIC found them at periscope depth. The metallic pings got faster and louder. Every ping hit the hull and shook the boat. Every man froze. We knew the enemy above, knew exactly where we were. The hunter had turned into the hunted. The change from predator to prey happened in seconds. Vera, who was 22 and only 6 months out of naval school, saw his captain's face go from confident to careful. Capitan Lotant Otto Arpulsion, a veteran of many patrols, immediately ordered a dive to 200 meters. The crew moved quickly, but every man knew what the ping meant. Their best advantage in visibility had been taken away by technology. They barely understood the ASDIC operator on the British destroyer was probably a young man like Vera, but his machine gave him power beyond experience or skill. It could see through the ocean, making sound pictures of objects. Hundreds of yards away, each ping sent at 14 kilo per second, above human hearing, when the sound hit U-557's steel hull. It bounced back to hydrophones under the destroyer. Simple math changed the time into distance and the direction of the echo showed the submarine's position. Every move U-557 made was tracked more and more. Exactly what followed were 7 hours of depth charge attacks. U-557 dove to 200 meters, ran silently, and crept at the slowest speed. The crew heard the destroyer's propellers churn overhead, heard depth charges hit the water, and counted seconds until each explosion. The depth charges sent shock waves through the hull. Paint chips fell from walls. Light bulbs broke. Men bled from ears and noses. The boat creaked and groaned under pressure. Inside the submarine, time felt painfully slow. The captain ordered all non-essential systems off. The electric motors ran at the bare minimum, moving the boat at barely 2 knots. Men moved slowly, if at all a dropped wrench, a slammed hatch or heavy step could give away their location. The crew stayed at their stations in almost total silence, breathing the hot, stale air, listening to death circle above. Vera remembered every detail that later filled his book. The temperature climbed past 35 degrees. Men took off their shirts. Sweating condensation dripped from pipes and walls. The air smelled of unwashed bodies, diesel and fear. After 3 hours, the carbon dioxide got dangerously high. Men gasped for air lungs, struggling with air recycled through 49 pairs of lungs many times. The destroyer above was relentless. The ASDIC operator held solid contact and would not let go every few minutes. The metallic pings got louder, showing the hunter was coming in for another attack. The crew braced themselves, holding stanchions, pressing against walls. Then came the splashes, the terrible sounds of depth charges hitting the water. They counted 1, 2, 3, sometimes 5 charges in a set, sometimes 10. The waiting was horrible. 7 seconds for 100 meters, 12 seconds for 220 seconds for 300 when the explosions hit. The whole submarine shook closer. Charges lifted the boat, tossing men off their feet. The hull groaned. Cork insulation fell. Sparks flew from panels. Leaks appeared, thin jets of seawater, shot in under pressure. Damage teams stuffed wooden plugs, tightened bolts, shored up frames. After 7 hours, U-557 had gone to 280 meters, far beyond its crush depth of 220. The hull-compressed rivets groaned. Seams leaked. But Polshin knew his boat. He trusted German engineering had safety built in. He also knew going shallower meant detection and death. So he kept the boat deep silent and waited for the destroyer's fuel or patience to end. Finally, mercifully, the pings stopped, and the destroyer's propeller noise faded. Either the British captain had lost faith in his Aztec contact, or he had to go back to save fuel. U-557 waited 2 more hours, deep underwater, then slowly and carefully started rising when the submarine finally surfaced. After 9 hours, the men stumbled onto the conning tower, taking big breaths of fresh Atlantic air. Some vomited. From the sudden oxygen rush, others just stood looking at the sky, enjoying being alive. U-557 survived, as did thousands of other German submarines. In the early years of the war, the Aztec operators on Allied ships could detect U-boats, but had big limits. The system had a dead zone if a submarine was closer than 200 yards. The scent pulse and echo mixed, making a blind spot just as the attacking ship got close. Depth charges had to be dropped after losing the submarine, giving clever commanders a few seconds to dodge. Also, Aztec worked poorly in rough seas. Layers of water at different temperatures, called thermoclines, bent sound waves, making shadow zones where submarines could hide. Skilled U-boat commanders learned to dive under these layers where sonar could not reach. They mastered silent running, shutting down all unneeded machines, moving so slow their propellers made no noise. Even one heavy step could give them away. In 1940 and 1941, these tricks let German submarines keep working well, despite Allied sonar. The more experienced the commander, the better. They learned. Men like Verer, who survived their first Aztec encounter, studied the weaknesses. They saw that multiple escort ships, using different frequencies, made sound confusing. They learned to hide in the noise of convoys, where 50 merchant ships' engines and propellers covered the submarine. German submarines used different tech than the Allies. Instead of active sonar, German engineers made passive listening arrays. The Grin-Horscherrat, or group listening device, was on U-boats. From 1935, it had 48 hydrophones on each bow side. These could hear single ships 20 kilometers away, and big convoys up to 100 kilometers, though direction was not exact enough for torpedo attacks. This showed German strategy. U-boats were hunters, not prey. Their job was to find convoys, not hide. They made good listening tools, assuming enemies used the same passive systems they never expected. Allied ships could actively track subs with reflected sound. Captain Lieutenant Herbert Schultzer, commander of U-48, wrote in his patrol report from October 1940 that the British anti-submarine defenses were still weak. He said their listening machines only worked if we made noise, and if we stayed quiet, detection was impossible. This idea was shared by many U-boat commanders, but it would soon be proven very wrong. In 1942, the Atlantic changed fast. Though German submariners did not notice at first, in February, Admiral Donitz's U-boats started operating along the American East Coast taking advantage of America being totally unprepared. Merchant ships sailed alone without escorts, and many were sunk by the hundreds. Germans called it the American shooting season, but at the same time, British and American scientists were improving anti-submarine tech. In September 1940, Britain gave ASDIC technology to the United States for free, knowing that combined research could make countermeasures faster. American engineers at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington started working on Sonar, which stands for Sound Navigation and Ranging, by early 1942. British and American research together was making fast progress. The technology transfer was a great act of wartime teamwork. British scientists came to Washington with full blueprints, manuals, and even real ASDIC equipment from Royal Navy destroyers. American engineers studied every part and used U.S. industrial methods to make it better. The British used quartz crystal transducers, built by hand in small numbers. Americans made magnetostrictive transducers from nickel tubes that could be mass-produced. The British put domes over ASDIC. The Americans tried round domes that worked. Better for sound, the teamwork was not just hardware. Royal Navy officers shared years of experience teaching American students how to use ASDIC. Well, they explained how temperature layers bent sonar beams, how submarines hid in dead zones, and how skilled operators could tell real echoes from false ones. This fast sharing of knowledge turned years of learning into months, letting American forces use effective anti-submarine tools much faster. By mid-1942, U.S. shipyards were putting sonar on every destroyer, escort, and corvette, and the United States Maritime Commission made sure all the equipment was the same. This meant parts could be swapped between ships. Operators could move to new ships without retraining, and tactics could be the same across the whole anti-submarine fleet. American mass production turned sonar from a special British tool into a common Allied weapon. Three key improvements made sonar deadly. First, power rotation systems let ASDIC heads scan wide. ARC's fast submarines had less time to escape before operators had to turn hand cranks. Electric motors now swept 90 degrees in seconds. Escorts could search the whole front from left to right in the time it used to take for a small slice of ocean. Second, steel domes replaced canvas covers, letting ships go 20 knots instead of 15. Canvas domes made water turbulent at high speed. Hiding echoes, steel domes shaped in wind tunnels let water flow smoothly, letting escorts close on the submarines without losing contact. Third, dual-frequency systems used 14 and 30 kilocycles. Low frequency went far, but was vague. High frequency gave sharp echoes but did not travel far. Combining them let operators find subs at long range, then switch to precise targeting. Some systems switched automatically, giving both benefits in one sweep. Most revolutionary was Type 147 ASDIC. The Type 147 ASDIC, developed in 1943, could track submarines in 3 dimensions. It gave bearing range and depth. For the first time, Allied escorts could know exactly where a submarine was. In 3-dimensional space, depth charge patterns could be set with deadly accuracy. The underwater safe zone was disappearing. German U-boat crews noticed this. As a sudden rise in detection, Oberleutnant Wehrer, now first watch officer on U-230, in late 1942, wrote about the change in 1941. If we dove deep and stayed quiet, escorts usually lost us in an hour. By 1943, they kept contact 5, 6, 7 hours. They always seemed to know our depth. Charges exploded right at our depth. It was like they could see us. Wehrer's note showed a technological truth that German naval intelligence was slow to understand. The Allies had not just improved sonar, they had completely changed it. Type 147 could track submarines in 3 dimensions at once. German U-boat tactics made for older two-dimensional systems were now useless. Diving deep no longer meant safety. Changing course no longer broke contact and silent. Running no longer hid submarines. The psychological effect of constant sonar contact was huge. Unlike surface battles, where sailors could see and fight back submarine crews under attack, could only wait while destroyers hunted them, the steady ping. Ping-ping of sonar hitting the hull felt like a death sentence. Every ping meant the escort knew their exact position. Depth charges were being set to their depth. Death could come in seconds with only the splash overhead, as warning the sound itself. Was maddening, veterans said. It was like a fingernail scraping slate, amplified 1,000 times, echoing through steel. It reached every part of the submarine. Men in the forward torpedo room heard it as clearly as those in the engine room. There was no escape, some stuffed cotton in their ears, but the sound went through the hull, through the deck plates, through the air. It was everywhere, non-stop, unrelenting, worse than the pinging was. What it meant, every U-boat sailor knew. Basic physics sound moves through water about 1,500 meters per second. If an ASDIC operator heard an echo, 2 seconds after sending the pulse, the submarine was 1,500 meters away. Simple math gave range, the direction of the echo gave bearing, and, in 1943, with 3-dimensional ASDIC, the angle showed depth. The submarine had nowhere to hide. Every part of its position was known. Feldwebel Hirschfeld, on U-1009, which survived many depth charge attacks in 1942 and early 1943, wrote about the terror. The pinging never stops. It follows us hour after hour. We sit in darkness to save battery. The air grows bad. Carbon dioxide rises. Men gasp for breath. Still the pinging continues. We know they are above circling, waiting when the splashes come. We count 1, 2, 5, 10 depth charges, then wait for the explosions, wondering if this set will crack our hull and flood seawater. Hirschfeld's early 1943 diary showed the crews steadily worsening. The psychological state of U-boat crews was breaking. Men who had been confident fighters months before were now traumatized survivors. After heavy depth charge attacks, sailors would shake for hours. Some could not eat, their stomachs tied with anxiety. Others slept whenever possible to escape reality. A few completely broke down, crying or becoming catatonic. Captains tried to keep morale with routine and discipline. Daily drills went on. Equipment was kept ready. Watches were maintained, but everyone knew the truth. The ocean no longer protected them. The technology that had made submarines deadly in the last war had been matched by new tech that made them targets. The balance had shifted, and nothing German engineering or courage could fix it. In spring 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic hit. A climax in March. German U-boats sank 120 merchant ships, almost 700,000 tons, with only 12 submarine losses. Nearly 2/3 of these sinkings happened while ships were in convoys, the backbone of Allied defense. For 20 days in March, Admiral Donitz's wolf packs came closer to cutting Britain's Atlantic lifeline than at any other time in the war. The Royal Navy later said the Germans never got so near to stopping communication between the New World and the Old, but March 1943 was the height of U-boat power, not the start of renewed dominance. The technological and tactical balance was shifting fast. Allied shipyards, especially in the U.S., were making escort ships faster than they could be sunk. Destroyer escorts, corvettes, and frigates, all with better sonar, started flooding the Atlantic very long range. Liberator planes with radar and sonobuoys closed the mid-Atlantic air gap, where U-boats had once worked beyond land-based aircraft range. May 1943 became Black May for the Kriegsmarine. 41 U-boats were destroyed, a quarter of their operational strength. On May 24th, Admiral Donitz, shocked by huge losses, ordered U-boats to temporarily leave the North Atlantic. In his war diary, he wrote, "We face a situation where enemy efforts to limit our operations have worked. Their sea and air anti-submarine forces have grown. A lot? Our losses are too high." The numbers were grim in the first 3 weeks of May. 96 U-boats went to the North Atlantic, 41 were destroyed. 43% never returned. For comparison, all of 1941 had only 35 U-boat losses. Black May destroyed more subs in 3 weeks than a full year before. The exchange rate was disastrous. 12 merchant ships sunk for every U-boat, lost 2 years earlier. The ratio had been 10 merchant ships per U-boat per patrol, with most boats returning. Now subs were being destroyed faster than they could sink ships. Individual boat stories showed. The human cost U-463, led by Capitan Lieutenant Leo Wolfpower, was found by ASDIC on May 5th. While following convoy ONS-5, the destroyer Vidette kept solid contact. Despite evasive moves for 3 hours, Wolfpower tried everything: diving deep, changing course, speeding up, slowing down, dropping bubble decoys. Nothing worked. The ASDIC stayed locked. Finally, with batteries almost gone, and the boat damaged by near-depth charges, Wolfpower surfaced to fight with the deck gun, Vidette's 4-inch guns. Destroyed the submarine in minutes. 46 men died, 3 survived. U-192, led by Oberleutnant Verer, was hunted for 6 hours by escorts from convoy SC-129. On May 6th, the boat dove to 300 meters, far beyond design limits. The hull groaned, and popped leaks appeared in many places, yet sonar pings kept finding them. Escorts coordinated perfectly. One kept ASDIC contact, while others moved for depth charge runs. When charges hit, they exploded at exactly 300 meters. The pressure. Hull cracked, seawater flooded in. Only 8 men survived. 40 drowned. U-531. A new boat on its first patrol was detected on May 6th by an RAF Liberator with airborne radar. The plane surprised the submarine on the surface at night, when U-boat commanders had felt safe. The Liberator's searchlight lit up the submarine from half a mile away. Depth charges fell before the crew could dive. The boat was damaged, but stayed afloat. Escorts homed in on the radar. Contact got ASDIC contact and finished the attack. No one survived. U-194, U-125, U-438, U-657, U-273. The list grew longer each day. Some boats were destroyed by planes, others by surface ships. Many were hunted by air and surface forces working together, but almost all were first found. By radar or sonar, the technology advantage had shifted so much that German submarines could barely operate for crews still at sea. During Black May, the psychological impact was crushing. Radio messages brought news of boat after boat lost friends, and classmates vanished beneath the waves. The ocean that had once been a hunting ground became a killing field, where U-boats were the prey, and always the pinging sonar pulses left no place to hide. U-boat command tried to keep operations going by. Denial orders from Berlin said losses were temporary. New tactics were sent to boats. Commanders were told to keep going, that the tide would turn. But the men knew better. They had felt the relentless ASDIC tracking, survived depth charge attacks, aimed at them, and watched comrades die when hulls cracked. No propaganda could erase that Oberleutnant Verer, now commanding U-415, experienced it firsthand. In his memoir, he wrote, in April 1943, "We were detected within hours of arriving at our area. For 3 days, escorts hunted us relentlessly. Their sonar never lost contact. We dove to 300 meters. The hull groaned. Rivets popped. Still, the pinging found us when we tried to escape on the surface. At night, aircraft appeared with searchlights. There was no safe place left. We had become targets in a shooting gallery. Verreer's patrol on U-415 was one of his shortest and most terrifying. The boat left La Palisse on April 10, 1944, to patrol the western approaches to the English Channel. Verreer knew the mission was almost suicidal. Allied air and sea patrols made the Bay of Biscay crossing a nightmare. Submarines could no longer surface safely. Even at night, the new snorkel breathing tube allowed diesel engines. The snorkel let the submarine run its diesel engines while underwater, but Allied radar could still spot even this small tube above the waves. 4 and 15 crossed the Bay of Biscay by staying submerged for 18 hours straight, when the boat reached the open Atlantic on April 15th. Verreer surfaced briefly to fully recharge batteries within 20 minutes. An RAF Liberator appeared on the horizon. The plane had detected U-415's radar before Verreer's lookouts saw it. The submarine crash dived with seconds to spare depth charges, fell at the stern, damaging the stern torpedo tube, but leaving the boat functional for the next 60 hours. U-415 stayed submerged, running on electric motors, creeping away at 3 knots. Verreer knew Allied hunter-killer groups coordinated searches. A plane sighting would bring surface escorts. Sure enough, on April 18th, ASDIC pings echoed through the hull. An escort had found their trail. Verreer dove deeper to 250 meters and slowed to silent running. The pinging continued. The escort held solid contact hour after hour. Verreer tried every evasive move. He changed course, 90 degrees. The pinging followed. He sped up briefly, then slowed to confuse the ASDIC operator. He released a pill and wire bubble decoy. The pinging never faltered. The Allied operator was skilled enough to tell real submarine echoes from decoys after 8 hours of constant contact. Depth charges started falling. The patterns were frighteningly accurate. Explosions happened exactly at 250 meters where U-415 was. Verreer took the boat deeper to 300 meters. Paint peeled from bulkheads under pressure. The hull groaned. Men stood rigid at their stations, faces pale with fear. The attack went on all through the night and into. The next morning, Verreer's crew was exhausted. The boat's batteries were almost dead. The air quality dangerously poor. He faced an impossible choice: surface and fight, certainly dying under the escort's guns, or stay submerged until batteries ran out, then surface and surrender, or try to outlast the hunter. Hoping he ran low on fuel or depth charges, Verreer chose to wait for 16 hours. U-415 crept through the depths while death circled above. Finally, the pinging stopped. The escort had used all depth charges and left. Verreer waited 4 more hours, then surfaced to find empty ocean. The boat limped back toward France. Mission: aborted crew, traumatized. U-415 never went on another war patrol. She was sunk in her bunker at Toulon by Allied air attack in July 1944. Verreer survived only because he was ashore when the bombs fell. The technological gap was widening. By mid-1943, Allied escorts had not just better sonar, but a full anti-submarine warfare system. High-frequency direction finding, called HUFDUF by operators, could triangulate U-boat radio transmissions. Radar could detect surfaced submarines at night or in fog. Sonobuoys, dropped from aircraft, created underwater listening networks, monitoring huge areas forward, throwing weapons. Like hedgehog and squid, projected depth charge patterns ahead, while keeping sonar contact, eliminating the dead zone that once let submarines escape. The integration of these systems created a detection network stronger than its parts. A typical convoy in mid-1943 was guarded by 6 to 8 escorts each, with ASDIC radar and HUFDUF aircraft from Iceland, Britain, or escort carriers provided air cover. The mid-Atlantic gap, where U-boats once operated beyond aircraft range, had been closed. By very long range, liberators flying from Newfoundland and Northern Ireland every square mile of ocean, the convoy crossed was watched by multiple overlapping sensor systems. When a U-boat approached such a convoy, detection was almost certain if the boat sent radio signals to coordinate with other submarines. Huff Duff triangulated its position, and escorts raced to the area if it surfaced at night to follow the convoy. Radar found it, and aircraft attacked if it stayed submerged to approach. Underwater, ASDIC picked up the target. The submarine had basically three choices: all bad, stay far away, and be unable to attack close on the surface, and be destroyed by aircraft, or close submerged, and be destroyed by escorts. The Hedgehog weapon. System changed anti-submarine attacks completely earlier. Depth charge attacks needed escorts to pass over a submarine, dropping charges off the stern and losing ASDIC contact at the last moment. Hedgehog fired 24 small bombs forward, in an elliptical pattern. While the escort kept ASDIC contact during the attack, each bomb had 35 pounds of Torpex explosive and was armed to detonate on contact with a hard surface. If all 24 bombs missed, they sank to the bottom without exploding, and the escort could fire another pattern immediately. If even one bomb hit the submarine hull, it set off nearby, bombs creating a massive blast that could crack pressure hulls. German submarine commanders quickly learned to fear Hedgehog attacks, unlike normal depth charges that exploded even if they hit nothing. Hedgehog gave instant feedback. Silence meant a miss, explosions meant a hit, and hits were almost always fatal. The psychological impact was huge. Depth charge attacks were scary but could be survived even when nearby explosions occurred. Hedgehog hits were nearly always deadly. The Squid system, introduced in late 1943, was even deadlier. 3 large mortars fired patterns of 3 depth charges, 250 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike Hedgehog, Squid charges were set to explode at precise depths, calculated by an automatic computer. Using ASDIC data, the system accounted for submarine evasive moves, predicting where the target would be when charges reached preset depth. Squid-equipped frigates had a kill rate of 25% per attack compared to less than 5% for normal depth charges. German countermeasures were mostly useless. Die Pillenwerfer, a chemical device that made bubble streams to trick sonar, only fooled inexperienced operators. Veteran ASDIC operators quickly learned to tell the chaotic echoes of bubbles from solid steel hulls after a few seconds. Experienced operators ignored Pillenwerfer decoys, completely bold. Officially called Cobalt, was a more advanced decoy. This 1-meter balloon coated with aluminum strips and filled with calcium hydride slowly rose from deep water. When it reached shallower depths, seawater reacted with the calcium hydride to produce hydrogen gas, keeping the balloon neutrally buoyant. To radar, it looked like a submarine snorkel. To ASDIC, it made a valid echo, but bold had big limits. It could only be used from stationary submarines. It rose too slowly to protect a submarine during evasive moves, and it didn't move sideways. Any ASDIC operator who kept contact for more than a few minutes would see the target wasn't really a submarine. Absorbent hull coatings to reduce sonar reflection were studied a lot, but never really used. The Germans called it Alberic, after the dwarf in Wagner's opera who had a cloak of invisibility. The idea made sense. A rubber coating mixed with air bubbles would absorb sonar pulses instead of reflecting them. Lab tests looked good, but real use was impossible. The coating had to be several centimeters thick to work. It added a lot of weight. It broke down fast in seawater. Most importantly, it couldn't handle pressure changes from deep diving. The coating would compress at depth, losing its sound-absorbing power, then expand unevenly when the submarine surfaced, making gaps and tears. After months of research and testing on captured U-boats, the Allies decided Alberic didn't work. German scientists with even fewer resources came to the same conclusion. The main problem was German engineers had spent 20 years making submarines better at finding targets, but mostly ignored anti-submarine defenses. When Allied detection systems improved, Germany had no real answer. The Navy assumed future naval wars would be like past wars. They prepared to fight the last war while the Allies developed tech for a totally new kind of warfare. The human cost grew fast. In September 1942, 3,000 U-boat men were at sea on operational boats. By August 1944, 28,000 of the 40,000 men who had served in the U-boat force were dead. Survival rates for crews fell below 30%. Every patrol was almost a death sentence. Yet, the Navy kept sending boats out, even as green crews replaced the experienced commanders who had succeeded early in the war. Feldwebel Hirschfeld moved to the larger Type 9D submarine U-234 in early 1944, wrote of the psychological breakdown among crews. The new men were terrified before we even left port. They had heard the statistics. They knew 3 boats out of 4 never returned. When the sonar pings began, some men wept. Others simply shut down mentally, staring at bulkheads, unable to function. The veterans tried to maintain discipline, but we knew the truth as well as the novices. We were sailing in iron coffins. The advent of snorkel technology in mid-1944 offered brief hope. This extendable breathing tube allowed U-boats to run diesel engines while remaining submerged, eliminating the need to surface for battery recharging. Boats could theoretically stay underwater for entire patrols. But Allied radar quickly adapted, detecting even the small snorkel head above water, and submerged U-boats, whether snorkeling or running on batteries, remained vulnerable to increasingly sophisticated sonar. The snorkel itself was Dutch technology captured when Germany occupied the Netherlands in 1940. The original Dutch design was simple: a tube extending above the water surface to provide air to diesel engines while the submarine ran at periscope depth. German engineers refined the concept, adding automatic valves that sealed the tube when waves washed over it, preventing flooding. They also installed exhaust systems that vented diesel fumes underwater, eliminating the smoke plume that had made surfaced submarines visible for miles. In practice, snorkel operations were miserable. The submarine had to maintain precise depth control, keeping the snorkel head just above the surface. Too deep, and the automatic valve would close, causing diesel engines to suck air from inside the boat. Crew members experienced agonizing ear pain as pressure dropped suddenly. Too shallow, and the conning tower would break surface, making the boat visible to aircraft and surface radar. Rough seas made depth control nearly impossible. Waves constantly washed over the snorkel head, causing the valve to open and close repeatedly. Each closure created painful pressure changes inside the boat. The noise was tremendous. Diesel engines running at full power inside a submerged submarine created a din that made normal communication impossible. Men shouted to be heard over the roar. The vibration was constant, rattling every fitting, making sleep impossible. Exhaust fumes leaked into the boat despite German engineering efforts, giving everyone headaches and nausea. After 12 hours of snorkeling, crews were exhausted, sick, and deafened. Worst of all, snorkeling didn't provide the invisibility German submariners had hoped for. Allied radar operators learned to detect snorkel heads with increasing reliability. The small radar cross-section was challenging, but aircraft equipped with centimetric radar could pick up returns from the tube, especially in calm seas. Aircraft would then attack with depth charges or homing torpedoes, forcing the submarine deep and cutting short the battery charging cycle. Some boats were caught by surface escorts while snorkeling, detected by the acoustic signature of running diesel engines or by the wake created by the snorkel tube cutting through water. Allied operators had become expert at distinguishing genuine submarine contacts from false echoes. Training programs produced thousands of skilled sonar operators who could identify target characteristics, estimate submarine type from echo signatures, track evasive maneuvers, and direct weapons with lethal precision. The combination of improved equipment and experienced operators created a detection network that German submarines simply could not evade. British and American training facilities had standardized ASDIC instruction. New operators spent weeks in classrooms learning acoustic theory, how sound traveled through water, how temperature and salinity affected sonar beams, how submarine hulls reflected sound waves. They studied recordings of actual submarine echoes, learning to distinguish submarines from whales, wrecks, schools of fish, and thermal layers. They practiced on simulators that recreated hunting scenarios, developing the instant recognition skills needed in combat. By 1944, Allied navies were graduating ASDIC operators whose skills far exceeded those of the early war pioneers who had developed the tactics through trial and error. These operators brought professional pride to their work. They competed to achieve the fastest detection times, the longest tracking durations, the highest percentages of successful attacks. The Royal Navy published monthly tables ranking ASDIC teams by performance. The best operators were awarded promotions and decorations. Their expertise became the stuff of legend. Stories circulated of operators who could identify specific submarine types by subtle variations in echo characteristics, who could track evasive maneuvers through temperature layers, who never lost contact once they acquired it. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the Battle of the Atlantic had been decisively won. On the invasion day itself, not a single Allied ship was lost to U-boats during the massive Normandy landings, despite desperate German efforts to interdict the cross-channel traffic. The sonar screen maintained by Allied escorts was so tight that U-boats attempting to approach the invasion fleet on June 6th were detected immediately and driven off or destroyed before firing torpedoes. Though U-boats would sink some ships in the days and weeks following the initial landings, the immediate invasion force crossed the channel unmolested by submarine attack. Admiral Dönitz had ordered every available U-boat to attack the invasion fleet. 36 submarines deployed to the English Channel and western approaches. The mission was suicidal, and everyone knew it. The channel was shallow, restricting submarine maneuverability. Allied air supremacy was absolute, with hundreds of aircraft patrolling constantly. Surface escorts numbered in the hundreds, creating overlapping sonar coverage that left no gaps. Yet the order stood: attack the invasion fleet regardless of cost. U-boats equipped with snorkels fared slightly better than those without. U-84, commanded by Uloit Hinda, managed to penetrate close enough to the invasion beaches to fire torpedoes at landing craft on June 8th. The boat survived the attack and withdrew, though relentless ASDIC tracking and depth charging damaged it severely. U-984 was one of only 3 boats that successfully attacked invasion shipping and survived to tell about it. Most boats were not so fortunate. U-55 was detected by ASDIC on June 9th while attempting to approach the invasion fleet. The frigate Halstead obtained contact and held it for 11 hours. The submarine dove deep, running silent, but the Type 147 ASDIC tracked it perfectly in 3 dimensions. When Halstead's depth charges ran low, the frigate called in assistance. The destroyer Eskimo took over the hunt, attacking with squid mortars. The second pattern struck U-55 amidships, cracking the pressure hull. The submarine sank with all 48 hands. U-821 was hunted for 14 hours by multiple escorts on June 10th. The boat tried every evasive technique, diving to 300 meters, releasing bold decoys, changing course erratically. Nothing worked. The ASDIC contact remained solid. Finally, with batteries nearly exhausted and air almost unbearable, Kapitänleutnant Ulrich Nackfuss surfaced to surrender. Allied ships rescued 37 survivors. 12 men had died during the depth charge attacks. The slaughter continued through June and July. Of the 36 U-boats committed to attacking the invasion, 25 were destroyed. 69% losses in 2 months. The survivors limped back to French ports, damaged, traumatized, their missions failures. Not a single troop ship, not one major warship had been sunk. A few landing craft and small vessels had been hit at a cost of hundreds of German submariners' lives and dozens of irreplaceable submarines. The ocean floor off Normandy became littered with German submarine wrecks. Allied forces conducting post-war surveys would count 17 U-boat hulls in the invasion area, most showing evidence of catastrophic depth charge damage. These wrecks became underwater memorials to the futility of sending submarines against an enemy with total sonar and radar superiority. The introduction of Type 21. Electroboot, in the war's final months, represented German engineering's last desperate attempt to regain underwater superiority. These revolutionary submarines featured streamlined hulls, massive battery capacity, enabling sustained submerged speeds of 17 knots, and sophisticated acoustic quieting. Had they been available in numbers in 1943, they might have altered the battle's outcome. But only 2 Type 21 boats completed combat patrols before Germany's surrender. Far too few and far too late to matter. The Type 21 represented a radical departure from conventional submarine design. Earlier U-boats were surface ships that could submerge temporarily, designed primarily for operations above water with limited underwater endurance. The Type 21 was built to operate mainly underwater surfacing only when absolutely necessary. The hull was streamlined like a torpedo, removing the deck gun, external torpedo storage, and other parts that caused drag. This hydrodynamic design and 3 times the battery power of normal boats allowed steady underwater speeds that could outrun most escorts. The specs were strong submerged speed of 17 knots could be kept for 90 minutes. Cruising at 6 knots could be held for 3 days without surfacing. The boat could dive to 280 meters far deeper than the depths, at which Allied depth charges were usually set. The most new feature was the hydraulic torpedo reload system. The Type 21 could fire all 6 bow torpedoes, reload and fire again in less than 20 minutes, all while staying at action stations. German engineers also worked on the sonar detection problem. The Type 21's hull had synthetic rubber tiles to absorb ASDIC pulses. Propellers were shaped to cut cavitation noise. Machinery sat on rubber mounts to lower vibration through the hull. The snorkel was improved with better valves and more efficient airflow. In theory, the Type 21 would be harder to find and follow than normal U-boats. Production began in late 1943 using prefabrication from American shipbuilding submarines were built from 8 sections made in different factories across Germany, then moved to assembly yards for final construction. This modular way let production go faster. 118 Type 21 boats were finished before the war ended, with 4 reaching combat readiness. But the program had many problems from rushed design and spread out. Production. Quality control was very poor. Sections made in different factories did not fit together. Welds cracked under pressure. Electrical systems failed. The hydraulic torpedo system leaked. Most important, the rubber coating to beat sonar was unreliable. It broke in seawater, peeled off during deep dives, and sometimes made noise worse. U-2511, commanded by Korvettenkapitän Captain Adalbert Schnee, completed the only real Type 21 combat patrol. The boat left Bergen, Norway, on April 30th, 1945, just days before Germany's surrender. Schnee's orders were to show what the new submarine could do by sneaking past Allied lines and reaching the north Atlantic. For 2 weeks, U-2511 worked off the British Isles. Avoiding many Allied anti-submarine forces, Schnee found several possible targets, but held fire following orders to avoid fighting unless conditions were perfect. The patrol showed both. The Type 21's promise and its limits. The submarine could outrun escorts when found even then at times, but limited. Its underwater endurance was extraordinary, but it remained vulnerable to ASDIC detection. Allied operators adapted quickly to the new acoustic signature. On several occasions, escorts gained solid contacts and began hunting U-2511. Only the boat's superior underwater speed allowed it to escape. Schnee's patrol report, filed after Germany's surrender, concluded that while the Type 21 was a major improvement over conventional U-boats, it was not invisible to Allied sonar. Given enough time, Allied forces would have developed tactics and technologies to counter it. U-3008, the only other Type 21 to complete a combat patrol, had an even less impressive record. The boat departed Kiel on May 1, 1945, tasked with evacuating German personnel from Norway. It surrendered to Allied forces on May 9th without firing a shot. Post-war examination by British and American naval experts revealed the quality control issues that had plagued the program. The rubber coating was peeling in multiple locations, hydraulic systems leaked, electrical connections were corroded. The boat was operationally capable but far from the revolutionary weapon German propaganda had promised. For the German submarine crews who survived the war, the memory of sonar detection remained their most persistent nightmare. In post-war interviews and memoirs, veterans consistently returned to the sound of ASDIC pings striking their hulls. That metallic ringing, growing faster as escorts closed in, announced their transformation from hunters into hunted. It marked the end of U-boat invincibility and the beginning of systematic destruction. Herbert Verrier, one of only 3 U-boat commanders whose boats survived the war still operational, immigrated to the United States in 1957 and became an American citizen. In 1969, he published Iron Coffins, his memoir of submarine warfare. The book's dedication read, "To my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea." In it, he acknowledged the truth that had taken years to accept. We were defeated not primarily by superior courage or numbers, though both played roles, but by technology we did not understand and could not counter. The Allies learned to see through water. We never developed effective means to hide Verrier's path from defeated enemy. To American citizen reflected a transformation that mirrored his wartime experience. After Germany's surrender, he spent 2 years in British prisoner-of-war camps, working as an interpreter and liaison between Allied authorities and German naval personnel. His fluent English and cooperative attitude earned him early release in 1947. He returned to Germany briefly, but found a nation devastated physically and psychologically. The submarine service he had known was gone. The bases were rubble. The bunkers were filled with scuttled boats. Most of his comrades were dead. In 1952, Verrier immigrated to the United States on a technical visa, sponsored by a marine engineering firm that valued his submarine expertise. He settled in Connecticut working as a consultant on sonar and underwater acoustics. The irony was not lost on him. He was helping improve the very technology that had defeated Germany's U-boat. In 1957, he became an American citizen, swearing an oath to the nation whose sonar had hunted him through the Atlantic depths. Writing Iron Coffins became Verrier's way of processing the trauma and honoring the dead. He spent 6 years researching, interviewing survivors, consulting war diaries, and patrol reports. The book, published when Verrier was 49, became an immediate bestseller. American readers were fascinated by the first-hand account of submarine warfare from the enemy's perspective. German readers, particularly veterans, embraced it as honest testimony to their experiences. Unlike much German war literature that romanticized or justified Nazi service, Verrier's memoir acknowledged the futility and horror of the U-boat war's final years. The book's reception was not universally positive. Some German veterans accused Wehrer of exaggerating Allied technological superiority to excuse Germany's defeat. A few American critics suggested he had inflated his own accomplishments and minimized German war crimes. Naval historians debated details and disputed statistics, but the core narrative, the story of German submariners encountering Allied sonar technology they could not counter, was accepted as fundamentally accurate. Wehrer continued working as a marine consultant until his retirement in 1985. He gave occasional lectures at the Naval War College and the Submarine School, sharing his experiences with American naval officers. He participated in several historical conferences and documentaries about the Battle of the Atlantic. In his later years, he became an advocate for German-American reconciliation, speaking at veteran organizations and schools about the futility of war and the importance of international cooperation. The statistics tell a stark story. Of approximately 1,160 U-boats commissioned during World War II, 785 were lost. 30,000 submariners died, a casualty rate of 75%, the highest of any military service in the war. The majority of these losses occurred after May 1943, after Allied sonar systems matured. In the final 18 months of the war, sending a U-boat on patrol was effectively sentencing the crew to death. Wolfgang Hirschfeld, the radio operator who had served on U-109 through the early years, survived the war aboard U-234, which surrendered in May 1945. In his diary's final entry, he wrote, "We who sailed beneath the waves believed ourselves invisible warriors. The enemy taught us that invisibility was an illusion. Their sonar stripped away our sanctuary. In the end, we were simply men trapped in steel tubes, waiting for the pinging to find us. It always did." Hirschfeld's survival was itself remarkable. U-234 departed Kiel on its final patrol in April 1945, carrying secret cargo bound for Japan. The boat was loaded with advanced weapons, blueprints, technical documents, uranium oxide samples, and 2 Japanese naval officers. The mission was to exchange German technology for Japanese raw materials, particularly rubber and rare metals. But Germany surrendered before the submarine reached Japan. Captain Lieutenant Jan Hinrich Fehler, commanding U-234, faced an impossible choice: surrender to the Americans, continue to Japan, or scuttle the boat. Fehler chose surrender, but not before destroying the uranium samples and classified documents. On May 19, 1945, U-234 surfaced off the coast of New Hampshire and radioed their surrender intentions to the United States Navy. The destroyer Sutton escorted the submarine to Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. Hirschfeld and the crew became prisoners of war, but were treated with remarkable courtesy by American authorities, who were fascinated by the large Type 10D cargo submarine and its unusual cargo. Hirschfeld spent 8 months in an American prisoner of war camp in Maryland. Unlike the brutal conditions in Soviet captivity, where many German POWs died, American camps provided adequate food, medical care, and humane treatment. Hirschfeld worked as an electrician, repaired radios, and taught German to American intelligence officers preparing for occupation duty. He was repatriated to Germany in January 1946. Returning to Hamburg, Hirschfeld found his family's home destroyed by Allied bombing. His father had died in a raid. His mother and sister had survived but were living in a refugee camp. Germany was devastated, divided, and occupied. Hirschfeld worked various jobs, including electrical work, ship repair, and as a translator for British occupation forces. In the 1950s, he began writing his memoir based on the secret diary he had kept throughout the war. The book was published in Germany in 1972, providing Germans with an unsentimental account of U-boat life from a crew member's perspective rather than a commander's. Hirschfeld's diary entries from 1942 and 1943 documented the transition from confidence to terror as Allied sonar improved. Early entries described successful attacks, narrow escapes, and the camaraderie of the crew. Later entries recorded mounting losses, failed attacks, and the psychological breakdown of men who knew they were being hunted by technology they could not evade. The final entries from 1945 reflected not defiance, but resignation. We knew the war was lost. We knew most of us would die. But we kept going, because that was what warriors did, even when the cause was hopeless and unjust. The technological lesson was stark. Submarine warfare had fundamentally changed. The introduction of active sonar meant the oceans would never again hide submerged vessels as effectively as they had in the early war years. Every navy in the world studied the Battle of the Atlantic, absorbing the brutal education in underwater detection. Post-war submarine development focused on quieting, on acoustic signatures, and on evading increasingly sensitive sonar systems. The cat-and-mouse game between submarine stealth and detection technology had entered a new phase that continues to this day. Modern submarine warfare owes its fundamental principles to the lessons learned in the Atlantic from 1939 to 1945. Every navy invested in quieting technology to reduce sonar signatures. Hull designs emphasized acoustic stealth. Echoic coatings to absorb sonar pulses became standard. Propeller designs minimized cavitation noise. Mechanical systems were isolated on sound-dampening mounts. The goal was always the same: to restore the invisibility that German U-boats had lost when Allied sonar matured. The Soviet Union captured several Type 21 submarines and dozens of German engineers after the war. These became the basis for the Whiskey-class submarines that dominated Soviet naval construction in the 1950s. Soviet naval architects studied every aspect of the Type 21 design, particularly the sound quieting features. They recognized that future submarine warfare would be dominated by the competition between stealth and detection. Soviet submarines incorporated rubber anechoic tiles, improved propeller designs, and machinery isolation systems derived directly from German Type 21 technology. The United States Navy conducted extensive tests on captured U-boats, particularly U-2511 and U-3008. Both Type 21 boats surrendered in May 1945. American engineers were impressed by the streamlined hull form, the large battery capacity, and the hydraulic systems. These features influenced the design of the Tang-class submarines, America's first purpose-built post-war boats. The Tang class incorporated the teardrop hull shape pioneered by German designers, nearly doubling underwater speed compared to wartime fleet boats. Britain's Royal Navy tested U-2511 thoroughly, putting it through exercises against escort groups equipped with the latest ASDIC systems. The results were sobering. Even with improved sonar, detecting and maintaining contact with a fast, quiet, deep-diving submarine was extremely difficult. The exercises demonstrated that Type 21 boats, had they been deployed in significant numbers in 1943, would have posed a severe threat to Allied anti-submarine forces. This realization drove British submarine development for the next decade, resulting in the Porpoise-class boats that incorporated many Type 21 features. On the detection side, sonar systems grew exponentially more sophisticated. Passive arrays could detect submarines from hundreds of miles. Active sonar evolved into multi-frequency systems that could defeat most countermeasures. Computer processing allowed automatic target classification. The technological competition between submarine stealth and detection capability became one of the Cold War's central features, a direct legacy of the Battle of the Atlantic. American sonar development in the 1950s produced revolutionary advances. The SQS-4 sonar, introduced in 1952, could track targets at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. Variable depth sonar, towed behind surface ships on cables, could be lowered beneath thermal layers to detect deep-running submarines. Sonobuoy networks dropped from aircraft created acoustic fences across strategic choke points. By the 1960s, American anti-submarine forces had created detection capabilities that exceeded World War II systems by orders of magnitude. Soviet submariners found themselves in the same position German U-boat crews had occupied in 1943. They were being hunted by sonar technology that stripped away their underwater sanctuary. Soviet naval archives released after the Cold War revealed that submarine commanders in the 1960s and 1970s described the psychological impact of Western sonar in terms nearly identical to those used by German submarine veterans. The persistent pinging, the knowledge that the enemy knew their position, the helplessness of being tracked underwater by invisible technology. The technological competition drove both sides to extremes. Soviet submarines became progressively quieter, using advanced propeller designs, sophisticated rubber coatings, and innovative propulsion systems. American submarines adopted similar technologies while developing even more sensitive passive sonar arrays. The competition reached its apex with nuclear-powered submarines whose infinite underwater endurance made them genuinely capable of operating submerged for months at a time. But even nuclear boats remained vulnerable to acoustic detection. The fundamental lesson of the Battle of the Atlantic, that sonar could strip away submarine invisibility, remained valid. The human element remained constant. Submarine crews in all navies understood the lesson German submariners had learned so brutally. Being detected meant being vulnerable. The distinctive ping of active sonar striking a hull triggered the same primal fear in American, British, Soviet, and French submarine crews that it did in German sailors. That sound meant the enemy knew where you were, could track your movements, and could deliver weapons. The psychological reality of submarine warfare, shaped by the 1943 to 1945 experience, persisted unchanged. In 1985, 40 years after the war's end, a small gathering of German submarine veterans met informally in the United States. Former U-boat men, some with their families, came to see the nation whose technology had defeated them. Herbert Wehrer, then 75 years old and long settled in America, spoke with several veterans about their shared experiences. "We came into the war believing in our invincibility beneath the waves," Wehrer said to the assembled group. "We were taught that the ocean depths protected us, that submerging meant disappearing. For a brief time, this seemed true. Then we encountered your sonar. That sound, that metallic pinging striking our hulls, taught us the ocean no longer hid us. We learned fear in a way surface sailors never know. We could not see our enemy, could not fight back, could only wait in darkness while your technology hunted us. We were defeated by science, by engineering, by the capacity of free societies to innovate faster than we could adapt. Those of us who survived did so mostly through luck. We honor our fallen comrades by remembering the truth. We were not supermen in unbeatable machines. We were young men in obsolete submarines sent against technology we could not overcome." The small group listened in silence. Then quiet acknowledgement passed between them. American and German veterans together. Former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that had seemed impossible when those first sonar pings had struck German hulls in the early war years. They acknowledged the lesson written in 30,000 submarine graves at the bottom of the Atlantic. Technological superiority combined with industrial capacity and scientific innovation had proven more decisive than courage, skill, or determination. The German U-boat experience with Allied sonar stands as one of history's clearest examples of how rapidly military technology can shift strategic balance. In 1939, German submarines were essentially invisible when submerged, hunted only through luck or obvious mistakes. By 1944, advanced sonar systems could track submarines continuously, plot their movements in 3 dimensions, and guide weapons with lethal accuracy. The underwater sanctuary had been eliminated through applied science and engineering excellence. For the men who served in U-boats, this technological revolution meant more than tactical defeat. It represented a fundamental psychological transformation. They had entered the war as invisible hunters, confident in their ability to strike and disappear. They finished it as marked prey, constantly detected, perpetually hunted. knowing that the ocean no longer protected them. The sound of sonar pings echoing through their hulls became the audio signature of their obsolescence. The broader strategic impact was decisive. British imports of food and war material, which had fallen to critically low levels by March 1943, recovered dramatically as U-boat effectiveness collapsed. The massive buildup of American forces in Britain for D-Day proceeded without significant interference. The Atlantic supply line, which Winston Churchill later called the only thing that really frightened me during the war, became secure. Germany's bid to strangle Britain through submarine blockade had failed, defeated as much by sonar as by depth charges and aircraft. In the final analysis, the story of German U-boat crews encountering Allied sonar is a story of technological surprise, adaptation, failure, and ultimate defeat. German submariners entered the war with justified confidence in their invisibility and ended it as the most casualty-prone military service of any nation. Between those 2 points lay 30,000 individual tragedies, men who drowned in iron coffins at the bottom of the Atlantic, victims of technology they could not counter. The sound that transformed submarine warfare, the metallic ping of sonar pulses striking steel hulls, carried a simple message. The ocean no longer hides you. Surface technology can reach into the depths. There is no sanctuary. For German submarine crews, it was a lesson learned too late, one that redefined naval combat forever. ChatGPT said this message arrived too late to save their lives, but early enough to shape submarine doctrine forever. Their experience, fought with 75% casualties, taught the world's navies that underwater warfare had fundamentally changed. Invisibility was no longer assured. Detection was always possible. And in that possibility lay the end of submarine dominance, as 1940 German U-boat commanders had known it. The legacy of those sonar pings echoes still in every submarine that patrols beneath the world's oceans, in every detection system that searches for them, in every doctrine that seeks either stealth or detection. The German U-boat crews who first heard that terrible metallic ringing striking their hulls paid with their lives to teach a lesson that transcends their defeat. Technology transforms warfare faster than training, doctrine, or courage can adapt. Those who fail to recognize technological shifts in warfare do not merely lose battles. They lose entire campaigns, entire wars, and very often their lives. The iron coffins that litter the Atlantic floor hold 30,000 stories of men who learned too late that their ocean sanctuary had been stripped away by science. Their tale stands as testament to a profound truth. In modern warfare, technological superiority trumps traditional military virtues. The Allied sonar that detected German U-boats proved more decisive than the submarine's torpedo tubes, more effective than the crew's courage, more important than the commander's tactical skill. It was the weapon that ended the U-boat threat and secured Allied victory in the Atlantic. And for the men who experienced its relentless pinging in the darkness beneath the waves, it was the sound that marked their transition from hunter to hunted, from invisible predator to exposed prey, from confident warrior to terrified victim of technology they could not escape. It was the sound of the end of an era and the beginning of a new understanding of naval warfare, one where science dictated survival